Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. Ako si Lian Buwan. I-recap ko para sa inyo ngayon yung dalawa so far na mga kaso laban sa kandidatura na ngayong presumptive President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. nakakaakyat lang sa Supreme Court. The most recent of which ay kanina lang isinampa ng grupo ng mga martial law survivors, the likes of Bonnie Ilagan and Sator Ocampo, represented by their lawyer Howard Calleja. Kanina lang sila nag-file ng kanilang petition for certiorari sa Supreme Court. Nung isang araw, ang nag-file naman ay ang grupo ni former Supreme Court spokesperson Ted Te. These are the civic leaders like yung mga civic leaders na nire-represent ni Ted Te. They are two different cases. Pareho silang petition for certiorari dahil pareho nilang china-challenge yung mga denial ng kanilang mga petition sa COMELEC on bank. Pero magkaiba yung procedure na mangyayari. Sa grupo ni Ted Te, it's a petition to cancel the COC of Marcos. Samantalang yung sa grupo ni Howard Calleja, it's a petition for disqualification against Marcos. And they are two different petitions, and they are important to note kung bakit sila magkaiba. For one main thing, yung petition to cancel COC would void the entire candidacy of Marcos, whereas yung petition to disqualify, if we are talking about, sabihin na natin theoretically, hindi pa nag-e-election, hindi pa bumoboto. Yung petition for disqualification, if it had been resolved before election day, it would have given the Marcos camp a chance to pick a substitute for Marcos. Na dapat of the same name. So for example, Senator Amy Marcos could have substituted her brother, whereas kung na-cancel yung COC, void na, wala nang pwedeng mag-substitute sa kanya. But that is if we are still talking about pre-election day. Pero dahil nakarating to sa Supreme Court ngayong araw, ngayong linggo, kung saan presumptively nanalo na si Bongbong Marcos with 31 million votes, meron pa rin bang difference? So yun siguro yung isa sa mga discussion points sa mga susunod na araw at maging sa Supreme Court, because there is sa petition to cancel COC, malinaw para sa mga abogado na if the candidacy, if the COC eventually is canceled, then the winner would be the second placer, who is Vice President Leni Robredo, because kapag na-cancel yung COC ni Marcos, Robredo would be the highest, would have obtained the highest votes among all the qualified candidates, minus Marcos. Yun yung sa petition to cancel COC. Kung disqualification naman, there is a 2010 case wherein yung isang tumakbong mayor na disqualify siya, ang proclaim na winner ng COMELEC and then the Supreme Court was the vice mayor pursuant to the line of succession. So medyo it tickles the imagination of some that maybe if the petition for disqualification were to progress, it would ultimately benefit the Vice President-elect, who is Sara Duterte. When we're talking about a Supreme Court that is packed by the appointees of her father, President Rodrigo Duterte. Pero there is a 2013 case wherein sabi ng Korte Suprema, kapag dinisqualify mo ang isang kandidato, it will inevitably reach into the COC. Magiging void din yung COC. So, hindi rin mag-a-apply ang rule on succession. So, ang magiging winner pa rin is yung second placer, which is the first placer among all the qualified voters. So, there are two cases na magkaiba yung naging ruling, but of course, a decision is not always, di ba, parang hindi siya laging swak na swak sa isang similar case. You always have to appreciate or interpret the facts and the different laws. Kasi kailangan mo ring tignan ano ba yung facts of the case ng 2010 case, ano ba yung facts nitong 2013 case, at ano ba itong facts ng Marcos case. So we asked election lawyers, isa sumagot sa atin si COMELEC Commissioner Lucia. He agreed to the premise of the petition of Calleja. He said that if yung disqualification ground ni Marcos, which is his conviction for failure to file tax returns, if it existed at the time of the filing of the COC, then kapag na-disqualify ang kandidato, cancel din yung COC mo. Yun yung kanyang paniniwala. aligned to the 2013 case na sinasite ng Calleja Group and even the TEDTE Group. So timing naman sa usapan, the Supreme Court is in a writing break. Sa June 14 pa sila magre-resume ng kanilang on-bank session. So June 14 will be the earliest that these petitions could be put on agenda, if they will put it on agenda. And by June 14, we are expecting that Marcos has already been proclaimed the winner, because if we were to follow the 2016 timeline, by end of May, nakaproclaim na sila, na-proclaim na nila si President Duterte, and Marcos has a way bigger margin in his victory than President Duterte. But according to another election lawyer that we talked to, Attorney Emil Marañon, sabi niya, timing is not an issue kasi kahit na-proclaim na si Marcos by that time, SC would retain jurisdiction. So pwede pa rin silang mag-rule. Another issue that is being talked about is, will Supreme Court be passive or active in this case? Supreme Court in recent years had shown a trend for being passive, and in this case, sinasabi ng mga tao, they could potentially rule this way. Sabihin nila, we respect the will of the people. 31 million people have spoken. So dapat it will prevail. The voice of the people should prevail. The group of TEDTE had a counter to that, at sabi nila that a victory will never cure the ineligibility of a candidate, at para sa kanila, the will of the people is only second to the rule of law. Parang the voice of the people, of the voters, is only comes second to the rule of law if you were to follow what they're saying, which is that Marcos should have not been allowed to run for president in the first place. Again, it's a high mountain to climb because talo sila twice sa COMELEC. They lost in the division level. They lost in the unbanked level. It's 31 million votes, and they are bringing this to a Supreme Court that has in the past shown a tendency to be passive tungkol sa mga ganito. Iba parang lagi nilang nire-respeto yung political the political, parang lagi nilang nirespeto yung discretion of the political branches. So ngayon, parang some people are saying they'll probably respect the votes of the people who had elected and voted for Marcos in the May 9 elections. I'll just pasadahan ko lang yung mga naging isa sa mga merits nung yung kanilang mga substantive arguments. Dun sa, if we remember, kaya na-deny yung mga petition na ito is because, okay, facts muna. The Marcos was convicted of failure to file his income tax returns from 1982 to 1985. So that's 4 counts, 4 years. To be disqualified, kaya madidisqualify ang isang kandidato if you had been convicted of an offense that has an imprisonment penalty of more than 18 months. But the Court of Appeals did not impose an imprisonment on Marcos. So dapat burado na yon, pero sinasabi ng mga petitioner, under the tax code daw, mandatory dapat merong imprisonment sentence. And sinasabi rin nila, the tax code imposed an automatic penalty of perpetual disqualification. So the conviction in itself was a ground for disqualification. Pero sabi ng COMELEC, from 1982 to 1985, the prevailing version of the tax code was the 1977 tax code, na walang mandatory imprisonment at wala ring automatic perpetual disqualification. Ang tricky year ay yung 1985, because for the taxable year 1985, he should have filed his ITR in March 1986. And by March 1986, meron na tayong bagong tax code, which is the 1986 tax code, which mandated imprisonment sentence and which imposed an automatic perpetual disqualification as a penalty. So for the petitioners, kung hindi na nila mahahabol yung 82 to 84, then kaya nilang habulin yung 1985 dahil covered yun by the 1986 tax code. But the COMELEC in its ruling said, by March 1986, hindi na siya pwedeng i-cover ng perpetual disqualification because he's no longer a public official at the time. Because February 1986, the family has fled to Hawaii for their exile. Kaya hindi na daw siya public officer. Both the petitions, both the TEDTE and Howard Calleja petitions are saying, how can Marcos say he's no longer a public officer at the time when they didn't even resign? And even by that time, the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos was claiming he was the duly elected president. So hindi naman sila nag-resign, they didn't relinquish their power. At kung if the dictator was stripped of his power, it was only him. Marcos continued to be the governor of Ilocos Norte at the time. So public official siya. That's what the two petitions are saying. At yung susunod ay yung moral turpitude. Is failure to file an ITR a crime of moral turpitude? A crime of moral turpitude, wala siyang black and white standards. It's always decided on a case-to-case basis. Pero sa ruling ng COMELEC, sinasabi nilang it's not a crime of moral turpitude kasi hindi siya inherently evil. Hindi siya katulad ng murder or rape na inherently evil. It was only made into a crime because a law was passed making it into a crime. And for the COMELEC commissioners, that's not inherently evil. And therefore, it's not a crime of moral turpitude. Once again, the petitioners, the two petitions, are trying to convince the Supreme Court that it is a crime of moral turpitude. And their argument is, if you fail to file an ITR for 1 year, then maybe that's just mere omission. Nakalimutan mo lang, careless ka lang. But if you failed to file an ITR for 4 years, then that's not mere omission anymore. That's deliberate and willful, and it's a crime of moral turpitude considering na anak ka ng presidente at gobernador ka, vice-gobernador at gobernador ka ng isang probinsya. So yun yung sinasabi nila. So they have to convince now 15 justices of the Supreme Court, kompleto na ang bench. Probably it will be -1 because Justice Antonio Co will expectedly inhibit dahil isa siya sa mga commissioner ng COMELEC na nag-decide nung isa sa mga petition na to. So he will expectedly inhibit, and it probably, if it is raffled to the ANBank, it will be decided by 14. Hindi natin alam kung may mag-i-inhibit pa bang iba sa kanila. Having said that, June 14 pa ang resumption ng on-bank session ng Supreme Court. So it's only June 14 pa natin malalaman ang next move if it will be consolidated. But we are expecting that yung iba pang mga petitioners, marami pa sila. It's not only the Calieja and the TEG groups. We are expecting them to also elevate it to the Supreme Court in the coming days and probably weeks. So yun yung update from those two petitions filed this week challenging the candidacy and, in effect, the electoral win of a presumptive President Bongbong Marcos. I am Lian Bon. Thank you for watching this recap.